Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, all about processing leavers in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter for this session, and I am joined in the background by my colleague Alice, who's on hand to answer any of your questions. Let's now take a look at what I'll cover in the webinar. So we're going to start by talking about processing final payments for a leaver. So we'll run through some considerations when it comes to processing these payments, and we'll also explain what the final payment checkbox does within the Enter Payment screen. We'll then look at the leaver wizard, which is how you would record leave dates and how you would produce a P45. And we'll also look at other formats for P45, so how to email them as an alternative. And then we'll look at submitting an FPS, which will include all the leaver details, and it will report the leaver to HMRC. Going to finish the webinar with a section on common questions. So we are going to cover extra pay for a leaver after issuing a P45, plus some other common questions and some top tips. So that's what we've got lined up. Let's start things off by talking about an employee's final payments when they leave. So first of all, I have a list of points to consider when you're preparing to process an employee's final payment. So you can read more about this by following the link on the slide. But first thing to think about is, have you included all outstanding payments and deductions? And always keep in mind that the employee may not have worked for the full period when you pay them for the last time. So you may need to do a manual adjustment to their usual basic or salary. And think about other payments that might be due. So things that are sometimes paid in arrears, such as overtime and bonuses, and items such as accrued holiday that hasn't been taken. Next thing to consider is if the employee is currently receiving a statutory payment. So we're talking the more longer term statutory payments such as maternity pay or adoption leave. So if they are receiving a statutory payment and then they choose to leave or resign, in most cases they will be entitled to their full statutory pay for the 39 weeks. So if that is the case, you will either need to pay that as a lump sum when they leave, or you would need to continue paying them until the end of the payment when they were due to finish their statutory leave. Third point is, particularly if you pay monthly, are you planning to pay this employee earlier than usual? If so, you can do that. You can run a separate pay run with an earlier pay date. But remember, you must submit that pay date to HMRC in your FPS. So you'd basically be doing a mini pay run just with the leaver, and I will run through that in the example. Another thing to think about is whether they are a director. And if they are a director, are they on the pro rata basis? Because this means that there'll need to be a recalculation of their national insurance using annual bands the last time they're paid. And final thing to think about, not a nice thing to think about, has the employee died? If so, their final payment is not subject to national insurance. So as I say, more information on these points can be found by following the link on the slide. Now, there is a tool in Sage 50 Payroll that will help remind you about certain final items, and that is the final payment checkbox, which is found towards the bottom of the Enter Payment screen. So I just want to explain what that does and what it doesn't do. So as you can see from the slide, by selecting that box, it will recalculate a director's national insurance if they are on the pro rata basis to ensure that it's been calculated on the annual basis, which is the requirement for directors. It would pay any cash rounding amounts if you have a cash payment method and you usually round the amount of net pay. It would pay outstanding holiday fund if you've been accruing a holiday fund that is due to be paid to an employee. It pays tax refunds that have been withheld due to a trade dispute, if you've ever put them on a trade dispute status, if they're on strike, for example. And it will calculate certain outstanding items, specifically accrued holiday entitlement, if you've been recording holidays in Sage 50 Payroll, and statutory payment entitlement. And you'll see the impact of that checkbox as part of the demonstration. So that's what it does, but just to be clear, what it doesn't do is it will not adjust an employee's salary based on a part period. So if they're leaving midway through a month, and they haven't worked for that full month, you would need to do a manual calculation in line with your company processes to work out what you need to pay them for the period they have worked. Now, I want to give you a couple of demonstrations on final payments. So what I will do is I will bring these slides down, and we're going to jump into Sage 50 Payroll. So I'm going to start by working with some of my monthly paid employees. And I do have one employee who is going to be paid earlier than usual. So normally I pay my employees on the last day of the month. And you can absolutely do that for a leaver, even if they're leaving earlier in the month. But you do have a choice. You could choose to pay them earlier than usual, in which case you would do this separate pay run for them by just selecting them and running through the usual steps of a pay run. So I have an employee here, employee 3, who's actually leaving us on the 15th of November. And I have decided that I'm going to pay them on their leaving date ahead of when I pay the rest of my monthly paid staff. The first thing I'm going to do is set my process date to the date that this employee will be paid. So in this case, it's going to be the 15th of November. I've got the employee selected, and then I'm going to go into the enter payment screen to enter this employee's final pay. So I'm not going to check for legislation updates. I do know that I'm fully up to date. And as you can see, at the moment, we have the employee's full salary entered. So this employee gets a monthly salary of £2,291.67. Now, at the bottom here, we have the checkbox that I talked about that you would select if the employee is leaving and this is their final payment. So that will run some checks for us, but what it won't do is it won't adjust this salary. So I'm going to do a manual adjustment so that I'm paying the employee what they're owed up until their leaving date. So different ways that you could do this, and you would just need to check your own company policies as to how you would calculate a part period's wage. The way I'm going to do it is I've counted up the number of working days in the month, which is 21 in total in November, and I want to pay this employee for 11 of those days. So I'm actually going to adjust the hours or number value by doing 11 divided by 21, and then multiplying the result by the usual monthly salary. So that is just one way you could do it. Other ways might be to use a daily rate that you've calculated based on the annual salary, or even an hourly rate based on the hours worked in the month. So this is a reduced salary amount that I'm paying them, but I do have some overtime that I owe them from last month, and I've made sure I've got all the overtime information that I need. So I've got 5 hours here that we're going to pay them, and I've done a check and the employee has taken all the holiday that they were owed up to their leaving date. So I don't need to worry about holiday pay in this particular scenario. What I will do now that I've entered these payments is tick this box at the bottom of the screen. And it's run a few checks, and it is letting me know that there is an outstanding attachment order. So this employee is paying an attachment of earnings, and I will need to notify the court or creditor that the employee is leaving. So that's a job for the to-do list. And then it's finished its checks, and it's just confirming here what my next steps will be for the leaver. And they are to update the records to ensure their tax and NI details are correct and include the final payment, and to process their leaver details before we do the full payment submission. And I'm going to show you that later on in the demo. So I've got my employee's final payments entered. It's going to close out of the enter payment screen. And because I'm doing this mini pay run with just this employee selected, I would then complete the other steps in my pay run. So pension assessment, pay slips, and pre-update reports. Obviously, there would just be one employee in that set of reports. I can upload the pay slips if they get them that way. And then I'm just going to complete the process for this employee by updating my records. So I'll run that now. I could take a backup at this point. It'd be good practice to do so, but just to save time, I'm going to skip it. And it tells me there that my one monthly employee has now been updated. They now have a last updated date of the 15th of November, which is the date that I'm paying that employee their wage. Now, I'm not going to do the FPS at this point, and there's a very good reason for that, which I will come on to later. But I do want to enter some final payments for another couple of employees that are leaving this month. They're actually working until the end of the month. So they're going to be paid on their usual pay date, I've decided. But one of them is a director, so we may need to recalculate their national insurance. And the other one is currently receiving a statutory payment. And I just want to show you how that final pay run box would impact those particular employees. So I'm just going to move my process date forward to the usual pay date for these employees, which is the last day of the month. And I'm going to start with employee one. This is a director. They are soon to be a leaver. And if I go on the employment tab, you can see over here that director status is set to director pro rata basis. Now this means that national insurance is calculated per period in the same way as a non-director, and usually it would be recalculated in the last period of the tax year so that they paid national insurance on the director's annual basis. But because they're leaving before the end of the tax year, we need to make sure that we recalculate their national insurance in their final pay period, and we're going to do that by ticking the box. So going back into the enter payment screen just for this employee, I'm actually going to be paying them for the full month because they're leaving on the last day of the month. I've got no overtime or bonuses that I need to put through for them. And again, let's assume I've checked the holiday and I'm happy that they've taken all the holiday that they should have done. Now, at the moment, their national insurance is calculated on their monthly earnings because they're on the pro rata basis, and the employer's contribution is also being calculated based on this period's earnings. But if I tick this box at the bottom to say that this is their final payment, again, it's giving me the next steps, updating records and running the lever wizard. And it's now telling you that because they're assigned a status of director pro rata basis, we should only use this checkbox if the employee is leaving and this is their final payment. If they will continue to work for this company and you want to switch them to the annual basis, you can change the director status to annual if you want to in the record. But that doesn't apply to us. They are genuinely leaving. And what you might have noticed here is that we do have a national insurance refund. So some of the NI they've paid is being refunded, and the same is happening here, for the employer's national insurance. And that's because looking at the annual earnings so far and the annual thresholds, the employee has paid more than they should have done as a director. So that's now being taken care of in their final pay. Other employee I just want to show you is an employee currently receiving maternity pay, SMP, and she has decided that she's going to leave. She's not going on to a new job, because if they do move on to a new job after the baby is born, you wouldn't have to pay the remaining statutory entitlement, but it is their responsibility to tell you if they're moving on to another job. So they have got some entitlement owed. We've got this all set up. And if I go into the enter payment screen, currently, I'm only paying them their SMP, which you can see here on the summary tab. It's how much it is for the month. But if I tick this box at the bottom to say it's their final payment, we've got our next steps. And you can see that the statutory maternity pay has now calculated a lump sum representing the full entitlement. Now, if you didn't want to pay the lump sum, and if you are at all unsure, I would strongly recommend that you contact HMRC for guidance on this one, or read their guidance on the gov.uk website. If you only wanted to pay them up to their leaving date for the statutory maternity pay, what you could do is you could enter a return to work date as their leaving date, and that will then stop the SMP as of the date that they leave. But we're going to pay it in a lump sum, just shown here. And then it does offer us a report, which will also kind of show this information that's been calculated. So in this case, it is showing that there's SMP and a total amount has been included in the final pay. So I now have those final payments entered for my two employees. And again, I would complete the pay run in the usual way. So I'll just pick up my monthly paid employees. I'll just skip ahead to updating the records. So obviously I've got one that's already been paid. And that has now saved the figures for the current period in the employee's history so that they can be now included on the P45. So let's just jump back to the slides and recap some of that information. So as you've seen there, we have used the final pay run checkbox to recalculate some directors' national insurance. We also used it to calculate outstanding statutory payments, and it alerts you to other outstanding items. In our case, it was an attachment, but if you do use holiday schemes in Sage 50 Payroll, it would give you an alert if there is holiday that's not been taken that might be owed. So we are now at the point where we are ready to process the leavers. And just to reiterate, just to hammer this point home, it is really important that you do this at the right time. So first of all, you need to have updated records for the final payment, and that ensures that those payments are included in the year-to-date values that will be on the P45. You would then run the leaver wizard, so I'm going to show you in the demo, and that's where you record the leaving date, and you can produce your P45 reports, and if you want to, P11 reports for your own records. And only after you've done that would you send the full payment submission, the FPS, and that will then report the leaving details to HMRC. So when you run the leaver wizard, you'll be given the option of either printing or previewing a P45. There is now an option to email a P45 rather than print it out. We have email P45 layouts available, but they are found in the reports area rather than in the leaver wizard. So you would still run the leaver wizard to record the leaving date, but to actually send the email P45, you would go into reports. And there's different reports depending on whether you're using Microsoft Outlook or SMTP or webmail. Now, worth mentioning now that it is not possible to upload a P45 to the online portal in the same way as payslips and P60s. So you can't send them into Sage HR. And if you actually terminate an employee in Sage HR, they kind of wouldn't be able to access their profile. They might be able to access payslips and P60s, but you won't be able to upload a P45 in the same way. But you can email or you can print them out. So let's take a look at that for the employees that we have just processed. So just bringing them slides down again. We're going to go back to the demo. So I'm going to start with employee 3. So obviously he's been paid a little bit earlier in the month. And I'm going to start by selecting him in the employee list. Now, if you're a process map user, you'll see that there is an option to process leavers. So it comes after updating the records and posting the nominal link, but before the full payment submission. If you use the payroll tasks, there isn't a leaver task in here, but there is a link to make an employee a leaver. And you'll also find the same option if you go onto your employee tasks. You'll find the leaver wizard from here. So let's select employee 3 again. We're going to process them as a leaver. I'll just use the option in the process map. That is opening up the leaver wizard. So you'd click onto next. You then need to record the leaving date. So for this employee, it was the 15th. And then there's a drop-down option here where you can choose to print or preview P11 deduction cards for your own records, if you wish to. But we're just going to use it to produce a P45. So pick this option at the bottom, P45 plain paper for e-submissions. So you don't need any stationery. Then you can either print it directly onto plain paper, or if I click preview, it'll show you a preview of the report on screen. So this is the employee's copy, part 1A, which contains your PAYE reference, the employee's details, their leaving date, whether they're repaying a student loan, and their tax code. And if it's a cumulative tax code, so if it's not on a week, 1 month, 1 basis, it's also going to show the total pay and tax to date in this top section. Part 2 is what the employee will give to their new employer. So this information is used to set up a new employee record wherever they move on to. And Part 3 is just retained by the new employer, and the details on Part 3 would be sent in the first FPS that they send off. But it's Part 1A really is the main one for the employee. That's their own copy, given a record of the pay and the tax up to this point in the year. So you can print this out here from the preview if you're going to give them a printed copy. And then to complete the leaver wizard and record that leaving date, you'd simply click Finish. Now I'm getting that warning that they had an outstanding attachment order. So make sure I need to deal with that as well. And you'll see the current status has now changed to leaver in the employee list. And just opening the employee record, it has recorded the employee's leaving date as well. Now I'm going to follow the same process for my other two leavers, but because they both left on the same date, I can run the leaver wizard for both of them at the same time. So it's employee 1 and employee 4. I've selected them both in the list. This time I'll go to the employee tasks and I'll click leaver. So just a different way of getting to the same option. Click onto next. Record the leaving date for both these employees. So it was the 30th of November. And again, I'm not going to bother with the P11s, but I can produce the P45s. And this time, I'm going to have 6 pages altogether. So page 1 of 6. So I've got a P45 for each of those 2 levers. So again, it can be printed from the preview. You could export a copy for your own records if you wanted to save a PDF. And then when you're done, click onto Finish. And you can see those highlighted employees both now have a status of leaver. So if you're going to print it, you can print it from the leaver wizard. If you're going to email it, the first thing to do is to make sure that you've entered electronic document settings. So I have done that for this first employee. If you check the analysis tab in the employee record, you'll see there is a section for electronic documents on the right-hand side. So to email a P45, you need to make sure you've ticked send via email and recorded a confirmation date. That could be any date really. Enter the email address for your employee. And we also strongly recommend that you set a password for them as well, that they would need to enter to access their P45. So if you already email their pay slips, you'll have these settings in place already. So to email a P45, once you've run the leaver wizard, which I've done, select the employee and go into reports. Choose the employee folder here on the left-hand side. And then if you scroll down to the Ps, we have a P45 plain paper. So that's the one that you would print out. And then we have an Outlook and an SMTP version. Now, because I use Outlook, I'm going to run this one. And if I click onto email, just here at the top, that's going to create an email for this particular employee. So it has successfully output the report to email. And if I bring my Outlook up and have a quick check in the drafts folder, you can see it's created that email. Just drag it on the screen. It's got the employee's email address in from their employee record. And once I've sent this and it goes into my sent items, the employee would be able to open the attachment, pop the password in, and there they have the emailed version of their P45. So all of these steps are in the guide that I've linked to in the slides. So let's just recap then on the leaver wizard. So we ran this step after we'd updated the records, but before we do the full payment submission. You can use the wizard to enter the leaving date, and if you have more than one employee with the same leaving date, you can select them at the same time to run the leaver wizard. If not, do it individually. That can then be used to print or preview the P45, but you do also have that email P45 option. And if you want to read the full steps, just follow the link at the bottom there. Now, there is a third way of entering leaving details, which I thought I would quickly mention. We do cover this in our online payslips webinar, but if you've integrated your payroll with HR and you upload payslips to your employees, that creates an HR record for them. And if you terminate the employee in HR and enter their leaving date there, it would then be possible to import that employee data into payroll. So it effectively imports the leaving date, and then you would either need to email or print the P45 from the reports option. Now, a quick note about importing employee data. Usually you do it at the start of a pay run, but you need to have processed the final payment for a leaver and updated records before you import the leave date. So if you are going to use this, what I'd suggest you do is run import employee data at the start of your pay run, and that will alert you if anyone's been made a leaver in HR, and it should remind you that you need to process a final payment, but don't import the leaving details until you've updated their final payment. And you can read more about that process following the link. So on to the last step, and this is reporting the leaver to HMRC. This is all done now by submitting your FPS, full payment submission, which includes starter and leaver details these days. So you would submit this as usual on or before the pay date, and in the preview for the FPS, you will see the leaving date for anyone that you've processed as a leaver. Also worth noting that you will need to notify your pension provider if an employee has left, but the way that you would do that really depends on the process of your pension provider. So you might be able to do it via an online portal. You might need to contact them some other way. You may not even need to let them know at all. But check what the process is with your pension provider, and do make sure you've let them know about anyone who is leaving if they need to have that information. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate the FPS, just so you can see the leaver details being submitted. So let's do that now for you. So returning to my payroll tasks, I'm just going to go to the full payment submission option. Bear in mind, I have processed 3 leavers this period. You can ignore this warning. This is just because I'm in a training room, but it will take you into a submission screen like this. When I click continue, and I've checked my details, I would click submit. What I can then see is I do have 3 leavers this period with leave dates of the 30th, 15th and 30th. Now, in reality, because I was doing a separate pay run for employee 3, I'd have probably already sent the FPS for them, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to send the FPS for both pay dates at the same time. So that is how you report the leaving details to HMRC. It just goes through automatically as part of your full payment submission. So that's then done. My last FPS date has updated to the last pay date for each of those employees, and we have now processed our leavers. So I'm going to finish the webinar today, last 5-10 minutes on some common questions. So I've picked these out from our help center and also from our support team. First one we're going to tackle is extra pay for a leaver. There is a specific process you would follow, and it depends on kind of when you need to do this. So with extra pay for a leaver, if you've already made them a leaver, given them a P45, and you've submitted your FPS, if you then need to make an extra payment in that same period, you would treat it like a correction. So you would restore a backup or roll back the employee's final period. You would then reprocess their payments, but you would include the extra payment that was due. You can then print a new pay slip for the employee and work out how much extra you need to pay them if you've already given them that payment. You would then update the records and run the leaver wizard again So that just allows you to re-enter the leaving date. And then because you've already sent the FPS, you would submit an FPS adjustment for that period, which will send through the original leaving date, but with the adjusted figures, including the extra pay. So if it's extra pay for a leaver, but it's being paid in the same period as their last pay date, that's how you would do it. If it's in a later period, you would need to complete a few extra steps. So extra payments in a later period need to be processed on a 0T tax code on a week one, month one basis. And the way you would actually do it is you would make a note of and then delete the employee's leaving date. You'd set the tax code to 0T on a week one, month one basis. You would then process the payment that was due in the next available pay period. And one thing to note is that if it's an irregular payment, which is defined as accrued holiday pay or an unexpected bonus as examples, you would need to calculate the national insurance using weekly thresholds, even if the employee is paid monthly. Once you've entered that extra payment, you give a pay slip to the employee, update the records. You then re-enter the original leave date and you submit the FPS. So I'm going to try and demonstrate that one to you. Just bringing them slides down again. So I have a weekly paid employee who was made a leaver on the 1st of November, but I realise now that they had some accrued holiday pay that I need to pay them. So I'm going to pay that to them in the next period. So what I need to do is to go into their record, make a note of the leave date, 1st of November, and then delete it. We're then going to change their tax code to 0T. We're going to put that on a week one, month one basis. Now, if you're in Scotland, you would use S0T. So if the tax code started with an S, you'd use S0T. If it started with a C, you would use C0T. So it's on a week one, month one basis. Because this employee is paid weekly, the national insurance will be calculated using weekly thresholds. But if they were paid monthly, and this is an irregular payment, you would need to work out the national insurance manually, and you would need to switch to manual NI entry. But our guide kind of takes you through that in a bit more detail. So I've changed the tax code. I've noted and deleted the leave date. I'm then going to save this record. And then on my next pay date, which for the weekly paid employees was the 8th, I would enter the payments and I might create a new payment line. I'll call it holiday pay. So we can enter whatever the extra payment is. So we'll have calculated this somehow. So tax will be calculated on that 0T basis, so at basic rate, sometimes at higher and additional rate, depending on how much the pay is. National insurance being calculated with the weekly threshold, so not much national insurance actually due on this one. But you would do a pay slip for the employee, letting them know how much they're getting for this extra payment. You'd then update the records. Re-enter the original leave date. So it is telling me that that's before a later period I've updated, which is perfectly fine, because it is. And once that's re-entered, when we do our next FPS, it will submit the details of that extra payment. And that will be flagged as an extra payment for a leaver because of the 0T week one, month one code that we've used. So that gets submitted to HMRC. So there's no further P45 that you would issue in this case. They would stick with the original P45, but that is how you would deal with the extra payment. As I say, more guidance on that one is available on the link. Few other common questions I want to just briefly cover off, and I have linked to further information on some of these. So is it possible to hide leavers from your employee list? Absolutely yes. You can exclude both current year and historical leavers from your criteria settings above the employee list. So if I just bring payroll up on screen, see this criteria option at the top. If I click on that, you've got a section to exclude employees. So by default, historical leavers are excluded. If you also want to hide current year leavers, you can do by ticking this box. That has tidied up my employee list. Next one, I forgot to mark an employee as a leaver and I've submitted the FPS. What would I do in that scenario? So with this one, as long as you've processed the final payment, you would simply run the leaver wizard, enter the leaving date, print the P45, and then with this employee selected, you can submit an FPS adjustment, and that will then send through the leaving details to HMRC. If you don't do that FPS adjustment, the leaving date will be included on your next regular FPS, but it is best to get it submitted sooner rather than later. So that one can be handled with an FPS adjustment. Next one, I've processed a leaver, but I forgot to update their final payment. So you've done things in the wrong order. You didn't update records before you ran the leaver wizard. That one's easy to put right. So get rid of the P45 because that won't have the final payment on it. Remove the leaving date in the employee record. So just delete it and save the record. You can then process and update the final payment on the pay date that it was due. And then you can run the leaver wizard. Then you get a P45 with all of the final payments included. And then the leaving details can be sent in the FPS. Two more for you before we wrap up. I've processed a leaver by mistake and submitted the FPS. So they didn't actually leave. All you need to do in this scenario is to delete the leave date and continue using the existing employee record. And the fact that you'll just be sending a further FPS for that employee will then inform HMRC that they are still employed by you. So maybe you've selected someone by accident when you ran the leaver wizard. Just delete the leaving date from their employee record. And last one there, how can I re-employ a leaver? Well, you would treat them much the same as any other new starter. So you would create a new employee record for them. But a top tip is that you can copy personal details from their previous record in order to save a bit of time when setting it up. So just to show you that one, I just need to unhide my leavers from the criteria. So let's say employee 3 has actually come back to work for us. We can select their original record. And to create a new one, if I go to the employee wizard or the quick employee screen, either or, it says I've got a leaver highlighted. Do I want to re-employ them? If I click yes, see it's filled in a lot of their details based on the existing record. So a bit of a time saver. You would then enter their starter form details in the usual way for a new starter, and that will be an employee record for their next employment. One thing just to watch out for if you are doing that is if you use online pay slips, try to use a different email address if possible for the second spell of employment. If not, you will need to delete the original profile for in your online portal and remove the email address from the original record. But we do have steps you can follow that would help you on that. So just a few of the common questions there. And that does bring us to the end of the presentation, but we're going to stick around for these last 5 minutes just to make sure that we've provided answers to your questions in the Q&A. And I also want to briefly run through some of the further support that's available to you guys. So we do now have a one-to-one bespoke training service that you can book out to get a Sage expert to deliver a training session on a one-to-one basis using remote access. It could include things like admin automation using the pensions module, or if you're a new payroll administrator and you just need some help with getting up and running in the program. So if you want more details and a quote, you can contact our team at UKI Sage University at sage.com. We also have more webinars taking place this month. Our theme is very much processing payroll this month, although if you also deal with HR in your business, we do have a Sage HR showcase on the core HR module in Sage HR. So if you want to learn more and see what that can do to benefit your business, we're running that session on the 13th and 21st of November. But for payroll webinars, we've got Get Your Payroll Done Processing Payroll, Get Your Payroll Done Month End, and a guide to HMRC submissions. So if you're interested in any of those sessions, do sign up on our website. Just to let you know that we have help available 24/7 on our online help centre, which you can access at sage.co.uk/help, or by clicking any help icon in your programme. And you also have access to Sage University at sageu.com. So a wealth of information and e-learning courses that you can access from there. So in the couple of minutes that remain, I'm just going to have a quick check on the questions. I'm sure Alice has managed to answer most of those. If you'd like our handouts, it's your last chance to download them now. So grab them from the handouts area. And we will be sending you a follow-up email with a recording of today's session. So do look out for that in your inbox. One last favour I'd like to ask is that if you have a minute when you leave the webinar, if you wouldn't mind completing our survey, just to let you know what you thought of the session or any ideas that you have for future webinars. Very much appreciate hearing your thoughts. We do read all of your comments and it helps us to keep these webinars the best they can be. So I am going to disappear just for a few moments, but I will come back when we're ready to close this down. So I'll speak to you soon. Hi again, everyone, and thank you so much for sending those questions through. Had a bit of a flurry at the end there, but I think we have managed to answer most of them. So a big thank you to Alice behind the scenes, working tirelessly to provide the answers. And that is about all the time we have now. So thanks once again for joining us at the webinar. Do take a minute to complete the survey if you get a chance, and look out for that follow-up email arriving later today. But on behalf of myself and Alice, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar in the future. It's goodbye for now.